Hello and welcome to the latest vlog from bloodyflix.co.uk. I'm Paul Downey, and today we're going to be talking about, can you see that? Scream 3, which I recently finally purchased on Blu-ray. Basically this is one of the horror films from it's the early noughties. I think it was released in 2000. It gets a lot of flack from horror fans, mainly because it's probably the weakest, some people would say, of the Scream series, but having looked back on it over the last couple of days, I think it probably does get a bad rep. There are a lot of things that you can admire about the film, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I think the first one is that it looks at Hollywood in a kind of a different way. There's a lot of social commentaries. The Scream films have always been quite meta, but this one is like meta to the extreme. It's all about the kind of the cost of fame in Hollywood, and obviously it kind of focuses on that with the Rena Reynolds, Maureen Prescott character. And that's kind of honed in certainly more from Lance Henriksen's character's portrayal, obviously in the kind of the way that the CD70s obviously kind of paved the way for what was to come, obviously Maureen's kind of life, and obviously ultimately her death, illegitimate child, and obviously the whole kind of the full kind of Scream story obviously comes from this sort of damage that was done to her through the studio system effectively. Obviously, at the same time, we have a fake Woodsboro set, which is quite a unique thing, and it's quite weird for someone obviously who watched the films, many years ago when they were first released. It is when they kind of go into that set, and it's pretty much spot on to what it was in the original film with in Sydney there in what is her house, but it isn't her house, and getting chased around by the Ghostface killer once again. Which is it's very strange, but at the same time it's quite enamoring. There are some really good set pieces as well. Certainly one of the best ones is the opening. Scream have always been quite good at ways to kick off films. Obviously the first film has got one of the best openings of probably a horror film ever, really, in that it sets the scene in such a brutal manner with the offering of Drew Barrymore. Scream 2, we have the cinema stabbing. In this case, we get rid of Cotton Weary, which, to be fair, I always found was a bit of a weak character, almost there just because of the past, really. And obviously, this film helps to kind of bridge the gaps between the past and the present, but also maybe wipes out things that aren't really that important. And Cotton Weary is definitely one of them. Obviously, Liev Schreiber went on to do much bigger things than Scream certainly in the more recent years with successful TV series. But in here, he's a very expendable part, and obviously his offering is a way to introduce us to these new Ghostface killers, but at the same time, obviously get rid of probably a fairly inanimate character. One of the best things is Parker Posey in the film here. She obviously playing Gale Weathers with Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers at the same time, and them together is just it's the comedy relief that's probably missing from some of the films. This is probably the funniest of the franchise. Certainly, Scream was a bit more serious, but obviously at the same time satirical. Scream 2 was probably a bit darker, but this one seems to have a lot more fun, certainly with the kind of the slasher tropes and the things that have gone before in terms of how you get rid of the killer, obviously fighting back, and just her scenes in it are an absolute delight. And it was kind of a shame actually when she got killed off, and that her character had potential to probably survive a bit longer. And again, as I discussed, there are some decent scenes. Obviously, the final showdown is obviously brings Sydney back into the fold, but Scream 3 doesn't focus that much on Sydney as probably the others do. She's brought into the fold to kind of almost like to bring the killer out into the open, and we get more of a focus on Dewey and Gale and their kind of broken relationship, and obviously again they kind of drawn back to each other as well at the same time through really bad things happening, and this kind of extends on to what would become what happened in Scream 4, or all of like 11 years later, when it was more about the new generation. Obviously Sydney was there, but not as prominent, and same with Gale Weathers and also with Dewey. But yeah, I mean, it was probably, and obviously they established trilogy rules. Obviously Scream 2 was all about the sequel and obviously upping things, and then Then the third one was obviously meant to kind of throw a few things out the window, and obviously the explanation video by Randy, who's obviously is dead, was also quite strange and quite unique, because obviously it takes the series in a different direction as well at the same time. So that was quite an interesting way. And obviously there are the dream sequences, which obviously are bread and butter to someone like Wes Craven, obviously coming from the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and Freddy Krueger, but obviously having like Maureen haunting Sydney through her dreams is certainly a different way of looking at the Scream series, and it takes it in a minorly supernatural angle that hasn't really been seen before. And to be fair, was kind of canned for the fourth film, which went in a kind of a more modernized direction, a kind of almost a reboot of the series, before obviously it went on to become the MTV series. But yeah, I'd like to know what you think of Scream 4. Does it get a bad rep? Is it one of your favourites of the franchise, or do you just hate it altogether? Comment below and let me know. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.